Do you want your music to sound flawless? Well, today's your lucky day because you're about to find out the best way to compare your mixes to your favorite songs and immediately identify possible problems that would otherwise be hard to hear unless you have great speakers and incredible room acoustics. Check this out. What you're looking at is Voxengo Span. The blue content shows my song's frequency spectrum, and the green line is the spectrum of a song by Bruno Mars that I'm using as a reference, mainly to see how my low end compares and the high frequency energy levels. You can see my song has more bass, but his song has more going on in the mid-range, especially at around 200 Hz, which is where they place the snare. Also some differences in the high mids, and his high content seems to roll off at a lower frequency than mine. By the way, I'm curious, are you already using reference tracks when mixing your songs? Tell me in the comments section. Here's the thing about Span. It's free and you can pause this video to download now and then come back to follow along while I show you how to configure it. The link's in the description below. Make sure to download the VST2 version. If you get the VST3 version, you're not gonna get the same results. I've been using this plugin for a long time, but without paying attention to the configuration. Then about a year ago, I watched many tutorials, found a couple good ones, and configured it how they were doing it. But over time, I tweaked some things and added some important stuff that I learned in the user manual. So now I'll save you the time and headache and show you the shortcuts to the configuration that's the most useful for referencing tracks and making sure your mix will translate well in different speakers and listening environments. This is how it works. It shows the frequencies at the bottom and the amplitude on the right side. If you hold Control on a PC or Command on a Mac and click the spectrum, you can isolate the frequencies and listen to this band only. And this is super useful to quickly figure out which instruments to boost or cut if needed. Scrolling with the mouse makes it wider or narrower. It also has a nice mid-side stereo preset that I want to make you aware of, but it's not what we're going to talk about today. Alright, let's get started. When you first load Span on a track, it looks like this. It has lots of details and refreshes pretty fast. So on a full track, it gets confusing. I usually like this default mode when I'm working on individual elements, for example, equalizing a synthesizer or a guitar. Before I show you the mastering settings, there's this high resolution mode that is even more precise, and it's the best to quickly find the fundamental frequency of percussive instruments. If you like to tune them, just click hold to freeze the graph. By the way, I got a video on tuning drum samples and it's in the cards for you. Now for comparing mixes, load Span in the master track, then create an audio track for your reference songs like this one, and we're gonna send them to Span later. I always like to compare my mix to a bunch of reference tracks, not just one, so I double click this reference track and select Show Take Lanes. Then I load each reference song on a new take lane, all within the same audio track. This could also be done by grouping lots of audio tracks, but I prefer doing it with take lanes so the list of tracks doesn't grow too much. Now this is important. Make sure to point the output type of the reference track to external out instead of master. That way it won't get affected by the plugins in the master track. Then align the sections of the song you want to compare. For example, I have all these songs' choruses aligned here because I don't want to end up comparing a chorus to a verse. The energy levels would be very different in most cases. Then mute it. Now go back to your Span in the master track and use the sidechain feature to receive the signal from the reference track. Let's configure the plugin now. First of all, there's a lot of information that I won't use, so I like to make it cleaner by clicking Hide Meters and Stats. We're gonna work on routing this plugin to display two spectrums at once to overlay the reference spectrum on top of the master spectrum. I'll go really quick through this section and skip the whys because it's just technical stuff. It's how they designed the plugin, alright? I want you to go back to making amazing music and mixes as soon as possible, so here's what you have to do. Click Routing on the top to open this menu. In the input routing, add the numbers 3 and 4, like this. Then to keep things organized, click Group Names and rename Group 1 to Master and Group 2 to Reference. Done, let's get out of here. Now at the bottom, you can toggle between the master spectrum and the reference spectrum. Let's combine them. With the master group selected, click Underlay on the top and select reference. By doing that, Span is going to display both spectrums at once. But in this case, the spectrum is still in high resolution mode, so it's refreshing too fast and showing too much detail. Let's make it slower and smoother. Before we do that, can you subscribe to the channel and click the like button if you're enjoying this video? Alright, click on this gear icon to open the settings window. This plugin has different kinds of spectrum analysis. What I think is the most useful for comparing songs is the average analysis. The other modes are useful too, but this one is excellent for this task because if you just let it play for a few bars, it will give you an average of what's going on instead of displaying the frequencies of each transient, quickly replacing them with the next ones, which can be confusing and hard to interpret. This way you'll be more informed and aware of the bigger picture, and if you need to make changes to your mix's balance, you can make a better decision. I also like to keep the block size at least 8,000. A higher block size means the spectrum will be more precise in the low end, even though it uses more CPU. Next, it can be really useful to smoothen the spectrum so you don't worry about each frequency, every detail, but a wider range of frequencies instead. A good amount of smoothing is around 1/3 of an octave. But later, I'll duplicate this plugin and have another version running without the smoothing if I need to work more accurately on a small frequency range. One thing I haven't seen people talk about in tutorials is the offset feature, which makes this plugin align your song with the reference song even if they're not close in loudness, meaning it removes the loudness factor from the comparison, and that's awesome for referencing. You'll be able to compare your mix to a reference track that's much louder than yours and still fix balance issues because the plugin will display them as if they were equally loud. So select center if you like to take advantage of that, and if you do so, you probably have to make adjustments to these two knobs, range low and range high, just to make sure you fit the spectrum within the available space and center it in a nice position. Mine is usually at -50 and -25. Okay, so now this spectrum is different. Make sure to switch to the reference tab and configure it the same way you did in the master tab. I like to unselect fill display in the reference tab to turn the spectrum into a line that's easier on the eye. And you can change colors here, whatever you like. Once all this configuration is done, I like to hide the groups bar at the bottom to make the spectrum a bit larger. Click this icon on the top right corner and unselect Show Groups bar. Before I forget, the sidechain analysis only reads one side of the stereo on your reference track. So make sure to sum it to mono or else the other side's information will not be in the picture. And for a fair comparison, maybe convert your mix to mono also when referencing. I usually don't, but you know, just mentioning. Alright, Span's ready, but that was a lot of configuring, so don't forget to save it. I saved it inside an audio effect rack that I use in all my tracks. Now you can just loop your song while the reference is muted and let it gather information for as many bars as you want. You can also swap references with your take lanes. Just click the speaker icons and you compare your mix to another song. And make sure to click on Span to reset the spectrum when you do so. Even though this plugin offers you all this information about your song's frequency spectrum, don't feel forced to change your mix just because it looks different from your reference. The goal here is not to copy someone else's mix or make the spectrum have the same exact shape as the reference track. Every mix has different elements, so these shapes will be different. If your song is in a different key, it will already look entirely different. The peaks won't align with the reference. That's why it's important to use more than one reference track. Ideally, lots of them. That keeps me from obsessing over details. And even though this tool will visually help you learn why your song sounds different than the references, avoid mixing with your eyes. I know you've probably heard that before, but it's true, and I've made that mistake. Always question yourself, does this actually make it sound better? Sometimes it doesn't, so trust your ears. Listen to the reference tracks and take breaks to reset your ear fatigue. Also, when I find a specific frequency range that needs more energy, I avoid just equalizing the master track. I'd rather just go back to the mix and increase the volume of instruments that operate in that specific range. Hey, after comparing your songs to reference tracks, if for some reason you're left with the feeling that your music sucks, there's a video you need to watch next. I'll make it pop on your screen in a second. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this video and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next ones. Thanks for hanging out, I'm Thales and here's the video I told you about.